all the street lights. They walked all over people's gardens, and they scared the children. Can I get a shame, shame, shame? Shame, shame, shame.
This is too much.
Yeah, well, come on now.
Don't touch me. Don't you touch me.
And I feel I've accomplished what I've been put on this earth for.
Check, please. I gotta keep records of all of them.
I know.
So then I'll know how many times to invite the individuals when I get my show.
Oh, okay, you better get on with the show. I'll try to clean it up for you.
Too late now.
I glanced across the aisle, and I noticed that the lady occupying the seat there had her baby with her. Ugly baby.
Flip Wilson, with his flashy suits, big personality, and legendary catchphrases, he seemed like he had it all: fame, wealth, and a hit TV show.
Out with Flip Wilson.
We gonna cook.
Have a laugh with your favorite funny man and his wild characters.
This is a great pleasure. For y'all, that is. Because it ain't no big thing.
But here's the thing: behind the glitz, behind the laughter, behind Geraldine's sassy one-liners, there was a much darker truth that most fans never knew about.
My opening night at the Bitter End, we had executives from all of the networks, and I don't think that I got across as well as I would like to have on the performance.
What really happened to Flip Wilson? What went on behind the scenes that Hollywood tried to keep hush-hush? And why did he suddenly disappear from the spotlight? When he was at the top of his game, trust me, this one's going to shock you. Let's get into it. Flip Wilson was the biggest thing on television. In its first 2 seasons on NBC, The Flip Wilson Show was the second most watched program on TV. His comic characters spawned 2 of the medium's hottest catchphrases: "The devil made me do it," and "what you see is what you get." He jump-started the careers of the 2 biggest names in comedy, George Carlin and Richard Pryor. In January 1972, Time magazine had him on the cover, calling him TV's first black superstar. As Cook writes, the January 31st, 1972 cover of Time magazine showed Flip under a halo of stage lights and a banner that dubbed him TV's first black suit superstar. Roland Flamini's cover story hailed a comedy idol whose show was regular Thursday night fare for an estimated 40 million Americans. Flip had 5 million more viewers than any president has gotten votes. Flamin thought he knew Flip's secret: he has the talent to make blacks laugh without anger and whites laugh without guilt. And then basically he quit, pulled the plug on his cut back on stand-up work, didn't write a memoir or try to host a talk show. By the time of his death of liver cancer in 1998, at age 64, Wilson was a pop culture footnote. Today, 15 years later, he's nearly forgotten. Cook tells the comedian's story from horrific childhood to hard-fought fame to long, slow fade-out, even with help from Wilson's son Kevin. That story includes plenty of the comic's not-so-funny side, a private world driven by substance, selfishness, and distrust.
Because of this, because of the depression, because of the nervous breakdown, because of the money, because of everything, he basically pulled away. He kind of self-exiled himself.
Wilson's dark side was rooted in a dizzying childhood. When he was 7 or 8, his mother cleared out the family's apartment, drained her husband's bank account, and ran off with another man, leaving Flip and his 9 siblings with nothing after living in basement tool sheds and coal bins. The kids were parceled out to relatives and foster families. Lying about his age to escape, 16-year-old Wilson enlisted in the Air Force. There, he developed an affinity for drugs, pot, but not heroin. He decided heroin inhibited his sense of humor and the other high he got from making people laugh.
If I can bring a smile to your face, a laugh to your lips, or even make you cry, and I feel I've accomplished what I've been put on this earth.
His outgoing personality and funny stories made him popular. He was even asked to tour military bases to cheer up other servicemen, claiming that he was always flipped out. Wilson's barracks mates gave him the nickname Flip, which he used as his stage name. Discharged from the Air Force in 1954, Wilson started working as a bellhop in San Francisco's Manor Plaza Hotel. At the Plaza's nightclub, Wilson found extra work playing the drunken patron. Between regularly scheduled acts, his inebriated character proved popular, and Wilson began performing it in clubs throughout California. At first, Wilson would simply ad-lib on stage, but eventually he added written material and his act became more sophisticated.
Before we go any further, a couple of questions I'd like to ask.
Questions?
To be all right?
This ain't gonna be one of the surveys, is it?
No. The good stuff comes.
Then one night in 1965, fellow stand-up Red Fox was on The Tonight Show. Johnny Carson asked Fox, who's the funniest comedian out there right now. Fox, without missing a beat, answered Flip Wilson. From there was no stopping him. Wilson did Carson and Ed Sullivan's show, became a top headliner, landed in a couple of high-rated TV specials, and in 1970, his own primetime variety show. Back in the late 50s and early 60s, Flip Wilson was grinding it out in nightclubs on the Chitlin circuit, playing to mostly black audiences. By the 60s, he was a regular at the legendary Apollo Theater in Harlem, but his big break that came out of nowhere in 1965, thanks to comedian Red Fox was on The Tonight Show with Johnny Carson. When Carson asked him who the funniest comedian was at the time, without hesitation, Fox said Flip Wilson. That was all it took. Carson booked Flip on the show, and from there he became a regular guest, cracking up audiences on The Tonight Show and The Ed Sullivan Show.
My bitter end appearance was responsible for my Ed Sullivan Show.
Really?
Yes, the night of my opening night at the bitter end, we had executives from all of the net.
Out of all his TV gigs, Wilson later said that Ed Sullivan gave him the biggest career boost. But he wasn't just stopping by talk shows. He popped up on all kinds of hit variety shows and sitcoms like Here's Lucy, where he played a hilarious version of Prissy in a Gone with the Wind spoof with Lucille Ball Laughin'. And the Dean Martin Show. Flip was everywhere. Wilson's warm and avant personality was infectious. Richard PR told Wilson, "You're the only performer that I've ever seen who goes on the stage, and the audience hopes that you like them." Flip Wilson's big break in Hollywood came thanks to a hilarious routine called Columbus from his 1967 comedy album Cowboys and Colored People. In this bit, he put a wild modern twist on the story of Christopher Columbus. Instead of just discovering America, Columbus convinces the Spanish royals to fund his voice voyage by telling them he'll also discover Ray Charles. That's when Queen Isabel Johnson, voiced in an early version of Flip's famous Geraldine character, excitedly tells him, "Chris, you can have all the money you want, honey, go find Ray Charles." And when Columbus sets sail, an absolutely wasted Queen Isabella is at the dock, shouting to everyone, "Chris, going to find Ray Charles." By 1970, Flip was on fire. He won a Grammy for his comedy album, The Devil Made Me Buy This Dress, and became a regular on Rowan and Martin's Laugh-In. His popularity even led to 2 animated TV specials created by Deppy Fang Enterprises, Clairo Wilson and The Miracle of 14 Pounds, and Clairo Wilson's Great Escape. In 1970, The Flip Wilson Show hit NBC, and it was a game changer. Flip wasn't just cracking jokes. He was hosting some of the biggest black entertainers of the time. We're talking Lena Horne, Harry Belafonte, Diahann Carroll, The Supremes, The Jackson 5, Aretha Franklin, The Temptations, Gladys Knight, and The Pips, and even legends like Red Fox, Muhammad Ali, and Bill Russell. And he had a signature way of welcoming his guests, the Flip Wilson handshake, 4 hand slaps, 2 elbow bumps, and finishing it off with 2 hip bumps.
You haven't been in my life but 2 minutes, honey.
Geraldine, I'm Ralph Edwards.
I don't care if you Prince Edwards.
The show's writing team included none other than George Carlin, who also made regular appearances. The 2 of them took Carlin's classic newsweather sports bit and turned it into TV gold. Flip also used some unforgettable characters like Reverend Leroy, the flashy pastor of the Church of What's Happening Now. But his biggest hit, Geraldine Jones, she was sassy, confident, and always talking about her mysterious boyfriend Kay. She also dropped some of the most famous catchphrases of the era. "The devil made me do it," and "what you see is what you get." Flip had officially taken over TV. Part of the charm of the Flip Wilson Show was that it was at once a throwback, a mix of sketches, showbiz legends, and rising stars, and something new. The latter was mostly thanks to Wilson's eye for young talent and his eagerness to give performers of color an overdue shot at a prime-time audience. The Flip Wilson Show aired through 1974, generating high ratings and popularity among viewers, and winning strong critical ACC acclaim with 11 Emmy Award nominations during its run, winning 2. Wilson also won a Golden Globe Award for Best Actor in a Television Series.
Hey, Geraldine, will you join me on the stage where we have your check?
All right, Geraldine. I'll say, will you join me on the stage?
Yes, Ralph.
Wilson revived the career of crooner Bobby Darin. Darin's appearances landed him his own primetime variety show and made a household name out of aging Chitlin circuit legend Mom's Maeve. He added Carlin and Pryor. Both comics were having a hard time trying to bring more contemporary and drug-stoked comedy to their acts as writers and regular performers on the show. But Wilson was the glue that held it all together. Cook recounts, bolstered by interviews with several Wilson collaborators, including Tim Conway and Lily Tomlin, the comedian's tireless efforts to shape each program, from editing each script to handpicking the guests, and he created a raft of characters, especially Geraldine Jones, the dress-wearing, trash-talking street girl, and the Reverend Leroy of the Church of What's Happening Now, that were among the early 1970s most popular personas.
I think that I got across as well as I would like to have on the performance, but the gentleman did see something, and it led to my subsequent success.
Behind that happy screen personality, however, was a man in constant struggle. He distrusted everyone and frequently raged over real and perceived slights. He drank and smoked pot heavily, training his young sons to roll his joints for him, all that was hidden from audiences. In its first season, The Flip Wilson Show was the second highest-rated program on TV and won an Emmy for Best Variety Show. The next year, it was number 2 again. But after the show's ratings declined the next 2 seasons, NBC called for cuts. Instead of cutting, Wilson quit. When The Flip Wilson Show was at its peak, it was a groundbreaking success. Wilson wasn't just a comedian. He was a cultural icon, the first black entertainer to host a highly rated variety show on network television. But by 1974, the shine was wearing off, and behind the scenes, things were getting messy.
It happened so fast, so whop, like all of a sudden it just,
That's right. 12 years and then...
Wilson had always been hands-on with his show, carefully curating the sketches, guest appearances, and overall tone. But as the seasons went on, tension started brewing between him and NBC executives. Reports suggest that Wilson felt increasing pressure to conform to the network's vision, which often clashed with his own creative instincts. Some sources claim he wanted to push boundaries and include more socially relevant humor, but the network wanted him to keep things light and non-threatening. Flip set ratings records and helped bring dozens of worthy performers, many of them black, into the American mainstream at a time when other variety show hosts played it safe. Writes Cook, you could say that Flip was the first and last of his kind. He brought a new, fresh, respectable black humor to the mainstream, which became dated almost as quickly as it bloomed. He was a man of his time who changed his time, writes Cook. Behind closed doors, there were whispers that Hollywood executives weren't entirely comfortable with Wilson's level of influence. A black entertainer running one of the top shows in America was a big deal, and some insiders allegedly worked behind the scenes to limit his creative control. Wilson himself later admitted in interviews that he was often frustrated by the pushback he received when trying to make decisions about the show's direction. Wilson's rise to fame was unprecedented, but it didn't come without challenges. While he was beloved by audiences, he also faced racism within the industry. In the early 70s, mainstream television was still very much a white-dominated space, and the idea of a black man heddle in a primetime variety show made some network executives uneasy. Some reports suggest that advertisers were hesitant to fully back the show, fearing backlash from certain demographics.
Never returned to the heights of his early success.
I get away from the drab, and now here he is, and let's give him a big hand. And, well, I would try to make a difference.
As ratings dipped in later seasons, NBC didn't hesitate to pull the plug, unlike some white entertainers who were given multiple chances to rebrand or transition into other network projects. Wilson found himself struggling to secure another major platform. Some believe the industry was quick to let him go because they were never fully invested in his long-term success to begin with. Beyond the industry politics, Wilson himself was exhausted. Running a hit show was grueling, and the pressure to constantly be at his best took a toll on his mental and physical health. Some close to him said he felt trained by the demands of fame and had grown tired of the Hollywood game. Rather than fighting an uphill battle, Wilson chose to step away after the Flip Wilson show ended. Wilson's appearances on television became increasingly rare. He focused on raising his children and living life on his own terms. While he made occasional guest appearances in later years, he never returned to the heights of his early success. However, during the height of the Flip Wilson show, Wilson was under immense pressure. Not only was he the face of a top-rated variety show, but he was also one of the few black entertainers in a position of power on network television. That kind of stress took a toll, and like many stars of his era, he turned to substances to cope. Coke, in particular, became a dangerous escape for him. Hollywood in the 70s was notorious for its drug culture, and Wilson was surrounded by it. Some reports suggest that he initially used coke to keep up with the grueling demands of his career, long hours, constant performances, and the weight of keeping the show successful. But what started as a way to stay energized quickly spiraled into addiction. As Wilson's drug use escalated, it began affecting both his career care and his personal life. After the Flip Wilson show ended, he found it increasingly difficult to maintain his former success. The entertainment industry is brutal, and when someone starts slipping, the offers dry up fast. Substance abuse also strained his relationships. Friends and family reportedly saw a change in him. He was no longer the charismatic, quick-witted comedian. They knew his personal life became more chaotic, and some say his struggles with addiction contributed to the breakdown of multiple relationships, including his marriages. Unlike some celebrities who made headlines for their addictions, Wilson kept his struggles relatively private. He was never one to seek out media attention, and even as he dealt with personal demons, he didn't openly discuss them. Instead, he slowly withdrew from the spotlight, but he continued to work. He did a few specials, a couple big screen cameos, a failed sitcom in the 1980s. But as recounted by Cook, Wilson spent most of his time doing whatever he felt like, including lots of golf and bowling, riding motorcycles, a revolving door of spouses, girlfriends, and until he found out he had cancer in 1998, plenty of boozing and drugs. Cook doesn't come right out and say it, but Wilson's self-imposed exile more than anything else contributed to his fade from pop culture consciousness. Even though his variety show has been in syndication since the 1980s, it now airs on Aspire, a channel available on digital cable and satellite services that's aimed at African-American families. Flip Wilson wasn't just a comedy star. He made moves in TV and movies too. He showed up in films like Uptown Saturday Night and The Fish That Saved Pittsburgh in 1976. He played the Sly Fox in a TV musical version of Pinocchio, starring Sandy Duncan as Pinocchio and Danny Kaye as Geppetto, with music by Latin composer Billy Barnes. And if you were watching The Love Boat in 1981, you might have spotted Flip making a guest appearance.
I make an appearance every now.
I hear it's a sensational show.
In the mid-80s, he kept the TV gigs rolling. From March to July 1984, he hosted a revival of People Are Funny, and in 1985, 886, he took on the lead role in the CBS sitcom Charlie Enemy. Even in the 90s, Flip was still making people laugh. He popped up for quick cameos on Living Single in 1993 and The Drew Carey Show in 1996. No matter the decade, Flip always knew how to steal the show.
I did call a candy store, but they was closed.
I don't want to hear nothing you got to say. You're in a lot of trouble. You're going to jail.
Despite earning millions and achieving massive success during his career, Flip Wilson's financial life took a dramatic turn for the worse in his later years behind the laughter, and luxury Wilson was facing an entirely different kind of battle, one that involved legal issues, financial mismanagement, and personal crises that drained his wealth. At the height of his fame, Wilson lived a lifestyle that matched his status. He had the expensive clothes, the flashy cars, and all the trappings of a successful celebrity. But maintaining that kind of lifestyle came with a heavy price tag. And it wasn't long before Wilson's fortune began to slip away. Divorces took a huge financial toll on him, with hefty alimony and child support payments draining his income. Wilson had been married and divorced multiple times, and the legal obligations that came with these separations took a serious chunk out of his bank account. On top of that, his lavish spending habits didn't help matters. Keeping up appearances in Hollywood wasn't cheap, and the more he spent, the less he had left in the bank. While Wilson was known for his comedy, he wasn't known for his business savvy. There were reports of disputes with former business associates and financial advisors, some of whom allegedly mishandled his money without the proper guidance. Wilson found himself caught up in bad investments and shady dealings that led to significant financial losses. As his wealth began to dwindle, Wilson faced growing pressure to settle debts and keep up with his financial obligations. The cracks in his financial situation became more and more evident, but Wilson kept a low profile, rarely discussing the difficulties he was facing. By the mid-1980s, Wilson's financial and personal issues had caught up with him in a very public way. In 1986, he was arrested at an international airport on drug charges, a direct consequence of his ongoing struggles with substance abuse. The arrest shocked fans who had seen him as a smooth and charming entertainer, but were unaware of the turbulent reality behind the scenes. The arrest was part of a larger pattern of poor decision-making that affected Wilson's personal and financial well-being. It wasn't just the substances, it was a combination of poor financial choices, legal entanglements, and the constant pressure of maintaining a high-profile lifestyle that led to his downfall. By the time Wilson's legal and financial issues reached their peak, his career was already on the decline. His later years were marked by a battle to reclaim some semblance of normality. But the damage had been done. The comedian who once had it all found himself struggling to stay afloat. His earlier fame and fortune a distant memory. He became a footnote in American racial and cultural history. One of his last public interviews was on the Howard Stern radio program. 1 year before he died, Wilson talked about a medical procedure where he had a pump implanted in his pee. So many women, so little time. He said he then dropped his pants to demonstrate the device. For a man who boasted that one of his most important accomplishments was having sex with 6 women at the same time, the fear of impotence must have been great. The fear that having sex with 6 women at the same time was meaningless, even absurd, was even greater. Flip Wilson passed away on November 25, 1998 from metastatic biliary cancer in Malibu, California. He was cremated at Westwood Village Memorial Park Cemetery, and his ashes were scattered off Malibu Beach, a place he'd called home. That, as Flip illustrates, is our nostalgia-fueled culture's loss. Because as this portrait shows, what you saw wasn't all you.